A hand plane can be such a great addition to any woodworker's toolkit, provided you know a few things up front. First of all, you need to know what you're looking for, especially when it comes to vintage hand planes, before you buy one. Secondly, once you get that plane, you're going to need to know how to break it all apart, clean it up, sharpen the blade, reassemble, and tune the plane so it's ready for use. I've chosen this Stanley number 7 right here. This was made between 1929 and 1930. The reason I've chosen number 7 is because it's the largest plane that I have in my shop. So I thought that would make it a little easier when it comes to showing you some of the details of this thing. Secondly, this is my most recent acquisition as far as hand planes go, and this thing's in need of some love. So I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to tear this thing apart, clean it all up. I've got a new blade for it. We'll prepare that blade for use, put this thing back together, and then I'll share how I use a hand plane with you guys. So the first thing we need to do is we need to pull this thing apart. I need to clean all the bolts and screws. We want to make sure this thing is in immaculate condition when we put it back together. Now, I'm not going to do any refinishing. I don't want to mess with the patina that this thing's got on the painted surfaces. So hand planes have been around since ancient Egypt. They found hieroglyphs of not only hand plane designs, but of people using hand planes. I find that completely fascinating that these tools have been around for that long. Fast forward up to the 1700s, the mid-1700s, and that's when we saw the invention of what we now consider to be the modern hand plane, which is made of metal. The earlier ones were made out of wood. Then we get up to the mid-1800s, and Leonard Bailey submitted a bunch of drawings of his hand plane designs to the U.S. Patent Office, which those drawings and those designs were eventually sold to the Stanley Rule and Level Company up in Connecticut. Leonard Bailey is who most of us would consider to be the father of the modern metal hand plane. You know, this plane's almost 100 years old, and there's been no significant changes to this design even up through the present day. Now there's companies like Bridge City Tools, Melbourne Tool Company, Veritas. There's a lot of companies that have updated the look of the hand plane. But when it comes to the overall design of these things, that has changed very little throughout the years. I find that really cool. Anyway, this right here is called the body of the plane. This is called the sole. This is called the mouth. One of the things you want to pay really close attention to is how clean the mouth is right there. What's really important is that you want this surface as flat as possible, and then you want these sides as close to 90 degrees as possible with the sole of the plane. The next part that is super important is this right here. This is called the frog. But one of the most important things about these old Stanleys is I like the fact that this is a machined surface. Some of the newer hand planes, they hollow all this out and you only have certain little strips of contact where they meet the back of the blade. The next thing is this little lever right here that sits on top of the frog. This little ring right there actually nests itself in the blade. And when you move this, that's your lateral adjustment for your blade so you can square your cutting edge up with the sole of the plane, thereby making even cuts across your wood. This is an adjustment nut right here. That is tied to this little tooth right here. And when you spin that adjustment nut, it moves that tooth up and down. That pulls the blade out of the mouth or into the mouth. You can adjust your depth of cut. You can tell this has been carefully considered when they were manufacturing this thing to make sure this was a precision part. This is called the lever cap, or some people call it the cap iron. And that provides pressure up against the blade to hold this against the frog so your blade stays stable and in one place and doesn't move while you're using the plane. The blade set has two different parts. This is called a chip breaker. And this is the blade, or what is called the plane iron. This back handle here is called the tote. These are normally made out of hardwood, although some plane manufacturers have made these out of brass, out of aluminum, out of even hardened rubber. This front handle is called a knob, and these things have a shaft that run through them. This is a steel shaft with a little brass nut on the end of it, and that gives it kind of an ornate quality. I like that. This screw right here that we removed has got a ridge cut in it, and that goes in this hole right here. What that does is allows the frog to sit down on that notch just like so, and you can move your frog fore or aft. What that allows you to do is close the gap between the blade and the front of your mouth right there. That's important when you're planing really hard to plane wood, like heavily figured wood or stuff that's got crazy grain on it. If you see one that's got a really wide mouth, those are ultimately useless. And I found that out the hard way. So now that we've got the plane completely torn apart, what we want to do now is clean all this stuff. Before we do that, and to make certain that I don't need to flatten this or parallel the sides or anything, we're going to take a machinist square and we're going to check and make sure that the sides are perpendicular to the sole. And they are. Someone's obviously done this already to this plane. This is perfect. Another thing, and I've already checked this so I know the outcome already, but you want to check to make sure your sole is perfectly flat. I've got a precision straight edge right here, and there's no light. I've got some 320 grit sandpaper on this hard interface pad. When I first got into guitar building, in my case, I bought a couple of cheap hand planes, trying to be on the, on the econo end of things. But what I found out is they don't work. The soles are never flat. The sides aren't parallel. Since then, I've only gotten planes that I knew were in good condition and of a quality that they need to be in order to do the kind of work that I want to do with them. Now, I'm going to take a soft gray Scotch-Brite and just start hitting these top edges right here. I don't want to put the sandpaper across that. We'll get the whole plain body with the Scotch-Brite. Now, what I want to do is put on a pair of gloves, because at this point I don't want to touch that metal with my bare hands and get my finger oils all over it. And I'm going to wipe this down with some alcohol. It will get rid of those oils very quickly. It'll dry really fast. I'm going to take some of this paste wax. This is 10 different kinds of wax with graphene and ceramic. Space age stuff, I'm thinking. And I'm just going to coat the entire body of this plane with this wax. This will keep that surface rust from forming for significantly longer than it'll take without it. I've got all my small parts, all the bolts and the shafts that go in the tote and the knob, all that stuff are soaking in evaporust in this can right here. And they've been in here for a couple of hours. So we'll leave those to continue. I want to wipe the frog down with a little wax as well. and this will help with that rust again, but this will also provide a little friction reduction between the back of the chip breaker or the blade, and allow that to slide up and down this mechanism freely. All right, so while that wax haze is out, we've got a few other parts I want to pay some attention to, mainly the lever cap right here. So we'll take this soft Scotch-Brite pad and just shine this thing up gently. This plane's got a story of its own, I feel certain of it. And even though I may not know what that is, I know it's in there. You know, I can just feel it in the plane. Whoever owned this thing before me, and it was probably more than one owner, they understood what it meant to take care of their tools. And it makes me want to do that too, you know. There we go. Nice polished up lever cap. This thing's ready to go back on there. We've got everything done pretty much. I need to buff up the body, get the sole and all that clean from where we wiped the wax on it. We'll clean the frog up as well. And after this, I won't have to do any of this stuff again for quite a while. It'll all be about blade maintenance once we get this reassembly process done. We got a nice coat of wax on there. That looks really decent. I'm happy with that. And I'm just going to hit any of these friction points where there's metal on metal contact. We need to dry off all these small parts that I've got soaking in this evaporust. This is Lucas Extreme Duty Gun Oil. And I'm just going to use this again in all those little friction points. We'll rethread this on here. This is a reverse thread, so it spins backwards like that. All right, that's good. Now we need to thread this captive screw right here. This part of the frog, this hook right here, sits down over that just like so. Now we'll set our frog down on that so the hook rides in that ridge. We'll run that up so the front of our frog is parallel with the opening of the mouth right there. I don't even want to put anything on these handles. I like them looking just the way they look now. You don't want to over tighten the tote. That can cause the wood to split. There's another screw that goes in the front of the tote to make sure it does not rotate. All we've got left now is the chip breaker, the blade, and the lever cap. Now it's time to sharpen up this new iron. I got these from Woodcraft. These are Wood River brand. I've already mentioned that one time, I think, but let's pop this thing open and check this blade out. This new blade, as you can see, is considerably thicker than the old blade. The fact that it's a little thicker means that it's going to be less susceptible to chatter, and that's the main thing. Let's jump right into this and get this done. The first thing we want to do is check the back to make sure it's flat. How I like to do this is we're just going to make a couple of witness marks across the back of this blade. Just like that right there. We'll wet our stone down really good. That's looking pretty decent. All my marks are gone. That tells me right there that this blade is nice and flat. Now I would expect it to be so. This is a really high quality blade. I'm trying to apply even pressure across the front of this blade. So that's 320 grit on that side. Let's flip this over and we'll run this across the 800 grit side as well. You want the back as flat as possible. I use a honing guide. This is one I got from Saker right here. We're going to mount this blade up in the honing guide at 25 degrees. I've got a protrusion stop block right here. All I'm doing is getting the machine marks off the surface. I want the primary bevel to be mirror polished once we're all said and done. All right, we're going to call that. I'm going to flip over to the 800 grit side now. Now, we're going to take this stone out, and I'm going to use the 1000 grit side of my new king stone. We're getting there already. Let's lap the back and get rid of that burr. Let's flip this over to the 6000 grit side, and I don't really find it necessary to go beyond 6000 grit. What we're going to do, and I'll only need the 1000, 6000 grit for this part. We're going to flip it back over to the 1000 grit side, and we'll get it to 30 degrees. We're going to cut a micro bevel. Very little pressure downward on the blade. And you can see about 1 millimeter across that front edge, we've got a new micro bevel right there. We're almost done. I'm excited. Now that is a razor sharp plane iron right there. I don't think any YouTube video that has got anything to do with sharpening is complete without shaving your arm. So I was almost done the other night getting this thing put back together, and I kept having an issue not being able to adjust the depth. This plane blade would not pass through the mouth of this plane. I could not see what was going on behind the blade. I broke a little tooth off my depth adjustment right here. I found one of these, but it was going to take it a couple of weeks to get here. I ended up ordering a whole new frog assembly. I ended up digging through all my spare plane irons because the iron that came with this plane is wonky at best. It's all bent up and rippled. On top of that, there's a convex shape cut on the end of this blade, and I don't know how well you'll be able to see that, but it's on there. I got it all put back together now after 5 hours of sharpening on this old blade I've got in here. Whoever had this blade to begin with had cut a 45-degree bevel on it. It also had a convex shape on it. I wanted a square end, no convex, no concave shape, and I wanted a 25-degree bevel. So by hand, I spent all day today cutting a 25-degree bevel on this thing, polishing that bevel. Then I cut a 30-degree micro bevel on it. This plane's now ready for use. So what I'm going to say before we do a little demo on this thing is, this is a labor of love. You know, when you go down this rabbit hole and you start trying to investigate which hand planes you want, I was not willing to settle for anything other than this era of the Stanley. Well, these things have inherently small mouths on these planes because it is a jointer plane. And that is done that way on purpose. So you can take a really thin shaving and you can be really accurate with your plane. But you also have to be mindful of that kind of thing when you start trying to do upgrades and things like that on it. So let's take a couple of practice swipes across this beautiful piece of Jarrah I got viced up right here, and let's see what the results are. I am super happy with how this thing is looking. Now I want to start off applying my pressure to the toe or the front of the plane here. And as I go, I transfer that pressure to the back. And that assures me that I get a nice flat cut. And I'm happy with how that thing's cutting. Let's check and see if we're perpendicular with the sides. Oh, we are perfect. Now what I need to do is take my straight edge, pop it on here, and see if I can tell if there's any light coming underneath this thing. And there's not. So that tells me that this plane is fully ready to do some jointing work. And again, you guys, this is a labor of love when you start getting into these old vintage tools like this. I love the fact that this thing's probably been through 2 or 3 owners before it ever got to me, possibly even more than that. And each one of those guys perfected their skills as a woodworker while using this thing. And now it's my turn. Beautiful. I love these old tools like this, and this one's in great shape now that I've done just that little bit of work to it to get this thing up to usable condition. You know, I spent total probably about 8 hours refurbing this plane, and to me that's totally worth it to get something that's this usable. That's part of the fun of this. And that will add to your skill level when it comes to setting a plane up and how to maintain one. So yeah, I hope you guys got what you needed out of it. Don't forget to head over to benchcritters.com, get yourself a set of gecko blocks. While you're over there, check out the link Gio's put on the website to all the wonderful testimonial videos that have been done about these things. We feel so fortunate and honored to have had so many great makers say such positive things about the gecko blocks. Thank you to each and every one of you guys who have picked your own self up a set of gecko blocks from the website already. So thanks for stopping by the channel. I'll see you guys in the next video.